The year was 1887, and the land felt tired and worn just like the people who lived on it. The fields had given less each season, and the sky seemed harder than before. A young woman lived with her family in a small wooden house near a dirt road that few travelers used. She had known hunger since childhood, and she had learned early how to stay quiet and useful. She rose before the sun, helped her mother grind grain, fetched water from the creek, and kept her thoughts to herself. Her father carried heavy worry on his back, and in his eyes there were debts that would not wait, and a winter that promised no mercy when the men came to speak with her father. She stayed near the door and listened without lifting her head there. Voices were low and serious. They spoke of money owed and land that could be taken. They spoke of one last choice. The young woman felt cold spread through her chest. Though the room was warm, she knew what those words meant even before they were. Said plainly, she would be sent away, given to a man she did not know, in exchange for coins that would keep her family alive. No. One asked her what she wanted in that time. Wanting was a luxury. She watched her mother turn her face away and wipe her hands on her apron again and again, as if the motion could erase the moment. Her father nodded slowly, his jaw tight like stone. When it was done, the men left, and the house felt empty, even though everyone was still there. The young woman sat on the edge of her bed that night and stared at the wall. She did not cry because tears would change nothing. Instead, she tried to remember the sound of the creek and the smell of bread. Before the flower ran out the morning she left, the sky was pale and quiet. Her mother packed a small bundle with a dress, a shawl, and a piece of bread. Her father could not meet her eyes. When she stepped outside, the earth felt firm beneath her feet, like it was asking her to stand strong. A wagon waited by the road, driven by a man with a weathered face and careful hands. He did not smile or frown. He simply nodded and helped her climb Upis. The wagon rolled away. She did not look back. She feared if she did, she would break the road stretched long and uneven, passing fields that had been abandoned and towns that looked half asleep. She wondered what kind of man waited at the end. Of the journey, people had whispered things. Some said he lived alone, far from town. Others said he was quiet but fair. She did not know which frightened her more. The days of travel blended together. The nights were cold, and the stars felt close enough to touch. She wrapped herself in her shawl and listened to the sounds of the land. The driver spoke little, but sometimes he offered her water or asked if she needed to rest. His small kindness surprised her and reminded her that not all people were cruel. On the final day, the land changed. Trees grew thicker, and the road narrowed. The wagon slowed as it climbed a rough path. Her heart beat faster with every turn. When the cabin came into view, it looked simple and strong. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the door stood closed. The place did not look threatening, but it did not look welcoming either. It looked like it had been built for one person and no more than. Man who lived there stepped outside when he heard the wagon. His shoulders were broad and his face showed years of hard work. His eyes were watchful, but not harsh. He did not rush forward or speak. Right away, he simply stood there, as if measuring the moment. The driver climbed down and spoke quietly with him. Coins changed hands quickly and without ceremony. The sound of metal felt loud in the still air. The young woman kept her gaze low. She felt like an object being passed along, yet something inside her refused to disappear. She took a breath and reminded herself that she was still alive, still thinking, still feeling. The driver nodded once more, then climbed back onto the wagon and left. The sound of wheels faded until there was only the wind and the creak of trees. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The man finally spoke, his voice steady and calm. He told her she could come inside when she was ready. He did not touch her or step too close. That small space he gave her mattered more than she expected. She followed him into the cabin. The room smelled of wood and fire. There was a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and shelves lined with simple tools. Everything had its place. He showed her where she could set her things and where water was kept. He spoke as if explaining the land or the weather, not as if speaking to someone owned. His words were plain and careful. He told her meals were simple and work was shared. He said she would be safe there. Those words settled slowly in her mind like seeds waiting for rains. Evening fell. She helped prepare a meal. Her hands moved out of habit, and the act of doing something familiar eased her nerves. They ate in quiet. The silence was not heavy, just unused afterward. She sat near the fire and watched the flames dance. She thought of the long road behind her and the unknown days ahead. Nights she lay awake listening to the sounds of the cabin, the wind outside, the soft crackle of embers, the distant call of an owl. Fear still lived in her chest, but it was joined by something new. A small, cautious hope. She did not know what her future would be, or what kind of bond might grow in that lonely place, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life had not ended on that road. It had only changed direction. As sleep finally came, she held that thought close, like a quiet promise to herself that no matter how she had arrived, she would find a way to remain homewarding. Came slowly through the small window of the cabin. Pale light rested on the wooden floor and climbed the walls. The young woman woke before the man did. She lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet. The place felt strange but not frightening. The air smelled of ash and pine. She sat up and folded her blanket just as she had been taught long ago. She stepped outside while the world was still soft with dawn. The land stretched wide and empty trees stood tall and silent. A thin mist hovered. Near the ground she wrapped her shawl close and breathed in deeply. It was a lonely place, but also honest. There was nothing hidden here, no neighbors whispering, no eyes watching. When she returned inside, the man was awake. He nodded to her and handed her a cup of water. He did not stare or ask questions. He moved with purpose, setting aside tools and preparing for the day. He explained what needed to be done before nightfall. His words were few but clear. She listened carefully, grateful to have direction. They worked side by side, though not always together. She swept the floor, cleaned the small cooking space, and washed the few dishes left from the night before. Her hands stayed busy, which kept her thoughts from wandering too far. The man went outside to tend to chores she did not yet understand. From time to time she heard the sound of chopping wood or the creak of a fence being fixed. By midday, he returned and placed food on the table. Simple bread and beans. They ate quietly again. Yet the silence felt different now, less sharp, more like rest. She noticed his hands rough and scarred from years of labor. She wondered what life had shaped him this way, but she did not ask. After the meal he showed her the land nearby. He pointed out where water could be found and where the ground stayed firm after rain. He spoke of seasons and storms, and how the land could be kind one year and cruel the next. She listened closely, storing every word because knowledge meant survival. As the hours passed, she felt herself growing less tense. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. When she stumbled over a root, he reached out quickly to steady her, then stepped back as if unsure. His care surprised her. She thanked him softly, and he nodded. Once in the afternoon, clouds gathered and a cold wind swept through the trees. He told her they should return inside before the rain came. She helped gather what was needed and followed him back. The rain fell hard, drumming on the roof. The sound was loud but steady, like a heartbeat. Inside the cabin, the fire burned bright. He gave her a thicker blanket and motioned for her to sit closer to the warmth. He stayed across from her, fixing a tool. His presence was quiet, not demanding. She realized she was no longer holding her breath. As evening settled, she prepared the meal again. This time he showed her where things were kept and how he preferred them stored. The task felt less like service and more like shared routine. When they ate, he spoke briefly about the coming winter and what needed to be done to prepare. She offered to help in any way she could. Her voice was steady even to her own ears. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and said, "That was good," he said. Working together made things easier. Those words stayed with her long after the meal was finished. That night she slept deeper. The fear that had followed her for days loosened its grip. When she dreamed, it was of open fields and clear skies, not the long road or the sound of coins. The days that followed formed a pattern. Work, meals, rest. Each morning she rose earlier and moved with more confidence. She learned where tools were kept, how to mend small tears, and how to stretch meals so nothing was wasted. The man watched quietly, offering guidance when needed, but never shouting or rushing. Or once she cut her finger while working. Blood welled quickly, he noticed, and brought clean cloth, wrapping it carefully. His hands were gentle, and his face showed concern. That simple act stirred something inside her, a reminder that kindness could exist even here. In the evenings they sat near the fire. Sometimes he spoke of the land or the weather, sometimes they shared silence that felt earned. She began to feel seen. Not as property, but as a person carrying her own weight. One night she spoke of her family only a little. She said they had done what they thought was best. His jaw tightened, and he nodded as if he understood hardship too. He did not ask more, and she was grateful. As weeks passed, the cabin no longer felt like a place she had been sent. It began to feel like a place she was learning to belong. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer ruled her. Every task completed, every quiet meal shared, built something new. She did not know what the future would bring, but she knew this. The man she had been given to was not cruel. The land was hard, but fair. And somewhere in the space between work and silence, a fragile trust was beginning to take root. Days turned into weeks, and the work at the cabin became harder as the season changed. The cold wind grew sharper, and the ground became uneven in places. The young woman rose before the sun each day and moved with purpose. She chopped wood for the fire, carried water from the creek, and prepared meals with care. Every small task felt heavier, yet she did not complain. She was learning that strength came in quiet persistence. Man remained steady as ever. He worked alongside her without speaking much, but his eyes followed her closely. He corrected her only when necessary and praised her subtly when she did something well. At first, she had been cautious around him. Now she was careful, not because she feared, but because she respected his knowledge and his strength. One afternoon, while she gathered kindling, a sudden storm rolled in the sky, darkened quickly, and rain fell in thick sheets. The wind blew so hard that branches broke from trees. She stumbled on the wet ground and twisted her ankle. The pain was sharp and immediate. She cried out softly, but the man was already there, helping her up. He wrapped her ankle and guided her back to the cabin. His hands were firm but gentle, and his voice calm. He told her to rest and not to worry. The care in his actions warmed her, and she realized how much she relied on his presence inside the cabin. She sat near the fire with her foot elevated. The man went about his chores quietly, but occasionally glanced at her to make sure she was comfortable. She felt a strange mix of embarrassment and gratitude. Being dependent was new to her, but she accepted it because it was real, because it was human. In the following days, she adapted her movements to protect her ankle, and he adjusted the work so she could help without strain. They discovered a rhythm together. She would sweep and cook while he fixed fences and tended the animals. They worked together silently, but in perfect syncs. She would ask questions about his life before she arrived. The stories were brief. He spoke of winters harsher than the current one, and of people who had come and gone. He rarely mentioned friends or family. Only once he talked about a brother long lost. She sensed a quiet sorrow in his voice. She did not press because she understood that some pain was meant to be carried alone. She began to share small pieces of her own story too. She spoke of her family and of the home she had left behind. Carefully and without complaint, her voice grew stronger each time, and she felt less like a shadow and more like a person. He listened without judgment, and sometimes offered advice or observations that made her see things differently. Food became a shared responsibility rather than a chore. She learned how to stretch ingredients, how to preserve meat and vegetables, and how to make simple meals satisfying. Their evening meals became a quiet ritual. She would bring the food to the table, and he would sit down without speaking. They ate in silence at first, but slowly they began to exchange words about the day, the weather, or simple observations about the land. She noticed details about him she had not before: the way his hands worked without hesitation, how he could balance on uneven ground without faltering, how his eyes softened when he saw her laugh at something small. She started to look forward to these moments when he allowed himself to show a small piece of warmth. One cold morning, she found him struggling to lift a heavy sack. He saw her approaching and waved her off, but she insisted. She helped him, and together they moved the load into the cabin. The effort left them both breathless and sweaty, but the small victory made them laugh softly. A laughter that was free and easy. The sound lingered longer than she expected, and it filled the cabin with warmth. The days were not always easy. Sometimes storms came suddenly and chores grew overwhelming. Sometimes the man grew silent, and she could sense his mind wandering to places she could not reach. Yet even in those moments she learned to stay calm and steady, to carry her own weight without complaint. She was growing not only in strength, but in patience and understanding. She also learned to notice subtle shifts in him when he became tense. She would offer a quiet word or a steady hand. When he relaxed, she would speak lightly and share a smile. They began to communicate without many words through gestures. Shared routines and mutual respect, their bond deepened in ways neither had expected during quiet evenings by the fire. She would work on small tasks like sewing or sharpening tools. He sometimes sat nearby reading or mending his equipment. Occasionally, he would glance at her and offer a small remark or question. They began to share small parts of themselves slowly and cautiously. She discovered that trust did not arrive all at once, but grew piece by piece. More time she spent learning the land and the chores, the more she felt like she belonged. There was a sense of accomplishment in every task completed, every meal prepared, and every problem solved together. She realized that being useful and being appreciated for it was different than being owned or sent away. The cabin had started as a place of fear now. It was a place of learning and connection. In the evenings, when the wind howled outside, she would sit by the fire and watch him work quietly. She noticed the small things, like how he arranged his tools, how he cleaned the fireplace, and how he kept the cabin organized. Everything had a place and purpose. It reminded her that life could be structured even in hardship, and that order could bring comfort. She also began to understand his silences. They were not cold or rejecting. They were thoughtful pauses, reflecting. A man who had seen much and carried much, yet who still had capacity for care. She felt honored to share these moments with him, to witness the small ways he showed attention and concern them. Season pressed on, and the tasks grew heavier. The young woman found strength she did not know she had. She could carry water across uneven ground, lift sacks of grain, and chop wood with steady determination. Her body ached at times, but she felt pride in each accomplishment. She also felt a growing connection to the man whose presence had become a constant reassurance. One evening after the work was done, she looked out at the fading light across the fields. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, about the fear and uncertainty she had carried, and about the trust that had slowly grown. She realized that even in the harshest conditions, human kindness could appear in small acts of attention and care. She realized that connection was possible even when life had begun with loss. Man noticed her looking out the window and joined her silently. He did not speak at first, but simply stood beside her. They watched the horizon together. The quiet was comfortable, not forced. She felt a small sense of belonging swell in her chest. She understood that trust and respect were the foundation of something stronger. Even if the word love had not yet been spoken that night, she slept deeply again. Her body tired from work, but her mind settled. She felt more resilient and more connected to the world around her. She had faced hardship and fear, and survived. She had also discovered the presence of a steady, caring person who could be relied upon. She did not yet know what the future held, but she felt ready to face it. Spring arrived. Slowly at the cabin, with soft light and warmer air, the snow melted from the fields, leaving the ground wet and dark. The young woman woke each morning with a sense of purpose. She had grown stronger over the cold months and now moved with confidence. She tended the animals and helped repair fences and learned to predict the weather by watching the clouds and the wind. The man remained steady and careful in his work. His presence was no longer a shadow or a figure to fear. He offered guidance when needed and left her space to learn and grow. On mornings when the sun was high, they would step outside together, working side by side. Their movements became a rhythm of cooperation and understanding. One day they faced a challenge when a part of the fence had fallen in the storm. The animals had wandered dangerously close to the edge of the land. She worried they would be lost or hurt. The man noticed her concern, and together they worked quickly to fix the fence. They measured and hammered and lifted heavy wood together. Their hands touched briefly, and neither pulled away. The trust that had grown over months felt stronger in that shared effort. The meals they prepared became more than simple sustenance. They shared small smiles and stories from the past. While washing dishes, she would recount a memory from her childhood, and he would sometimes nod and add a quiet remark about his own experiences. She began to feel a sense of family she had thought was lost as days passed. The young woman learned to read the subtle moods of the man. She noticed when he was tense or worried, and would offer a gentle word or quiet presence. When he relaxed, she found herself speaking more freely, sharing laughter and small joys. They began to anticipate each other's needs without many words, and the cabin felt warmer because of it. One afternoon, while collecting herbs, she slipped and almost fell into the creek. He reached out and grabbed her quickly, keeping her safe. The incident was brief, but their eyes met, and a quiet understanding passed between them. It was the first time. She realized that what she felt for him was more than respect or gratitude. She felt care and concern deep within her. Heart, they faced small dangers together, like wild animals that wandered too close, or broken tools that needed urgent fixing each. Challenge brought them closer. They began to rely on each other not only for survival, but for companionship. She felt her heart open to the possibility of something more. She could not name it yet, but she felt it in the quiet moments of shared work. And silent glances evenings became times of quiet reflection. They would sit near the fire sometimes, speaking softly of the future, and sometimes in comfortable silence. She would watch the way his hands moved and the way he looked at the land. She noticed small acts of thoughtfulness, like placing her blanket closer or passing her the warmer cup. Without a word, the young woman began to understand that love did not always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it came slowly in shared tasks and care given without demand, and in the quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence. She felt a growing warmth in her chest and a desire to protect the life they were building together. The man, too, began to notice changes within himself. He had lived many years with little company and had trusted few. Yet her presence brought a new calm. He found himself speaking more freely and noticing the small details that once went unseen. He was learning that connection could be gentle and persistent, and that vulnerability did not always bring pain. One morning, after a long night of rain, they stepped outside to survey the land. The fields were muddy, but alive with new growth. She pointed out where shoots had begun to appear, and he listened carefully. They spoke about planting and the care needed to nurture the crops. Their conversation was practical, yet filled with shared hope and vision. In the following weeks, they worked together, planning and preparing for the harvest. She learned to till the soil and care for young plants while he tended to the older trees and animals. Their cooperation became seamless. Their shared laughter over small mishaps grew more frequent, and the warmth in their interactions became evident one evening. As the sun set, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn pink and gold. She rested her hand lightly on the railing, and he sat close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The air was filled with the quiet hum of life and the gentle rustle of leaves. She realized that this place that had once felt lonely now held comfort and joy. They began to speak of dreams and hopes more openly. She told him of her wishes for the future, for stability and purpose. He shared memories of his youth and the life he had hoped to build. She discovered that they shared values of care and perseverance and a desire to protect the life they had through shared work and quiet conversations. A bond deepened. They began to trust each other not only for survival, but for emotional support. Each day, they learned a little more about kindness, patience, and understanding. The cabin that had once been a place of fear had transformed into a home filled with potential and warmth. As the weeks passed, the young woman felt her heart opening. She realized that she cared deeply for the man who had shown her patience and respect. She noticed that she looked for his presence and found joy in shared moments. She also realized that he, too, was opening to her presence and care. They faced storms and setbacks together, yet they learned to support one another through each challenge. Their trust and affection grew quietly and naturally, like the shoots in the spring fields. They discovered that love could exist not only in grand gestures, but in daily acts of care and understanding. The young woman felt a sense of hope she had not known before. Her life had begun in fear and uncertainty, yet here she had discovered trust, warmth, and connection. She understood that the bond forming between them was built on shared experience and mutual respect. It was a love that was patient and steadfast, and it gave her strength. One evening, as the sky darkened, she sat close to the fire watching him repair tools. She noticed the way his hands moved and the quiet concentration in his eyes. She felt a deep appreciation and affection for him, and in that moment understood that she was beginning to love him. She did not rush the feeling. She simply acknowledged it and let it settle within her heart. The man, too, felt changes stirring within himself. He had grown accustomed to solitude and guardedness, yet her presence had softened him. He found himself anticipating her needs and feeling satisfaction in their shared work and companionship. He realized that he had begun to care for her in a way that went beyond responsibility. As the days grew longer and the fields greened with new life, they continued to build their bond in small ways. Through shared effort and quiet moments, their connection became more apparent in the way they moved together and the way they looked out for each other. Their hearts quietly found a home in the steady presence of the other. The cabin had transformed from a place of fear and uncertainty to a space of trust and budding affection. The young woman and the man had discovered that, through patience, kindness, and shared effort, a deep bond could be built. Even in the harshest conditions, they had learned to rely on each other and to see each other as companions and equals. Through work, laughter, and quiet reflection, they found that love could grow slowly and steadily. They both recognized the change within themselves and each other and began to see a future filled with hope, security, and mutual respect. They had discovered that hearts could open even when life began with hardship and uncertainty. Summer approached, and the fields around the cabin grew lush with new life. The young woman woke each day with a sense of purpose and hope. She moved with confidence, carrying out her tasks and caring for the animals and the land. The man remained by her side, guiding her where needed, yet giving her space to grow. She felt a sense of belonging that had been missing for years. They worked together, planting and tending crops, repairing fences, and gathering firewood. The rhythm of daily work became comforting. Each task completed brought satisfaction, and each day ended with quiet reflection by the fire. They shared small stories and memories from the past, their voices gentle and their laughter soft and steady. One afternoon, while mending a fence, they faced a sudden challenge. A wild animal had wandered too close to the land. She froze with fear, and the man acted quickly, guiding her to safety and securing the animal. He did not scold her, but offered reassurance in his calm voice. She felt her heart swell with gratitude, and something deeper. She realized that her feelings for him had grown beyond respect and trust. She cared deeply and longed for his safety as much as her own. The man too felt changes within himself. He had spent years isolated, cautious of others, and slow to trust. Yet her presence had softened him. He found himself noticing her absence and longing for her companionship. He began to feel emotions he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time, and he welcomed the warmth that came with them. Evenings became moments of quiet intimacy. They would sit by the fire, sharing the day and planning for the future. She spoke of hopes for children and a home filled with care. He listened attentively and occasionally shared his own dreams and fears. They discovered that they could be honest with one another. Without fear of judgment, their hearts quietly intertwined through patience. In shared experience, they faced small setbacks, like storms that threatened the crops and broken tools that needed urgent repair. Yet each challenge strengthened their bond. They learned to rely on each other not only for work but for emotional support. She discovered that love was built in daily acts of care, in listening, in helping, and being present. The cabin that had once been a place of fear was now filled with warmth and hope. The young woman began to feel a sense of pride in her accomplishments. And in the life they were building together, she noticed that her laughter came more easily, and that moments of joy were no longer fleeting. She felt her heart opening fully, and she realized that she loved the man who had shown her patience, respect, and kindness. The man, too, embraced the emotions that had been growing within him. He saw her strength and resilience and felt admiration and affection, found comfort in her presence and joy in her laughter. He realized that he had come to love her as much as she loved him, and that he could not imagine the cabin without her by his side. One morning, they took a walk across the fields together. The sun was warm, and the earth smelled of growth and life. She leaned on him for support. As they crossed a narrow path over a stream, he steadied her, and she felt the steady beat of his heart beneath his shirt. She knew in that moment that they were no longer just companions, but partners in life. Back at the cabin, they shared tasks with a new understanding. Each movement and gesture carried meaning and affection. They communicated in silence as much as in words, offering small acts of care and attention. The trust that had taken months to build now allowed their hearts to speak without Fear they began to plan for a future together. She spoke of planting more crops and raising animals. He spoke of expanding the cabin and improving their home. They imagined a life filled with shared effort and love, a life built on trust, respect, and mutual care. They recognized that the foundation of their bond was strong and steady, and would sustain them through hardships to come. Through the long summer days, they continued to learn from one another and grow together. The young woman discovered confidence and strength she had never known before. She realized that love was not always sudden or dramatic, but could grow quietly, in shared routines, in simple gestures, and in consistent care. The man too realized that love could be gentle and persistent. He discovered joy in small things and satisfaction in shared accomplishments. He learned to trust and to express emotions he had kept hidden for years. He felt a deep connection that brought him peace and fulfillment. One evening, as the sun set, they sat on the porch, looking out over the land. The sky glowed in shades of pink and gold. She rested her hand lightly on his, and he did not pull away. They shared a quiet smile and a sense of contentment. She felt a sense of home she had never known, and he felt a sense of completeness he had long sought. As night fell, they moved inside the cabin. The fire glowed softly, casting warmth across the room. They spoke of the future and of the life they wished to build together. They acknowledged the love that had grown quietly over time and embraced it fully. They promised to care for one another, to protect and nurture the life they had found in each other. The young woman realized that she had traveled a long path from fear and uncertainty to trust and love. She had discovered strength, courage, and the capacity to open her heart fully. The man realized that he had found a companion and a partner whose presence brought joy and meaning to his life. Together, they prepared for the coming seasons, planting and harvesting, tending animals, and caring for their home. Their love was evident in each small gesture, in each shared task, and in the quiet understanding that had grown between them. They had learned that hearts could heal and grow even in the hardest circumstances, and that trust, patience, and kindness could create a life filled with warmth and hope. As summer turned toward autumn, they sat together by the fire, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this place. They remembered fear and uncertainty and marveled at the trust and love that had grown. They knew that life would bring challenges, yet they also knew that together they could face anything. Their bond had transformed the cabin from a place of isolation and fear to a home of love and safety. They had built a life together on patience, shared work, and emotional connection. They had discovered that true love could grow quietly over time, and that hearts could open fully when nurtured by trust and care. The young woman and the man looked at one another with understanding and affection. They knew that they had found in each other a home, a partner, and a heart to cherish. Their journey had begun in hardship and uncertainty, yet it had led to connection, love, and hope. They had learned that life could be harsh, yet human kindness and love could create beauty and warmth. Even in the harshest places, as they sat quietly together, the fire crackled and the wind whispered outside. The young woman rested her head lightly, and he placed his hand over hers. They felt the weight of the past and the promise of the future. They knew that whatever came next, they would face it together with hearts open and strong. They had entered each other's lives unexpectedly and had discovered a love that was steady, true, and enduring. First frost came softly in the early morning. The young woman awoke to the smell of crisp air and the quiet hush of the land covered in a thin layer of ice. She rose, carefully checking the animals in the small garden. The man was already outside chopping wood for the fire. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air. She wrapped herself in her shawl and joined him, moving alongside with steady purpose. The cabin had become home in every sense. The walls were lined with the results of months of careful work. The shelves held jars of preserved food. The tools were organized, and the fire always burned warm at the center of the room. They had learned to rely on each other, not just for survival, but for companionship and support. Each task carried the rhythm of their shared life. That morning, they prepared a simple breakfast together. She handed him a cup of warm tea, and he offered a small smile that made her heart lift. They spoke of the day ahead, of the chores that would demand attention, and the work to prepare for the colder months. Their voices were calm, Steady and filled with a quiet understanding, the land demanded attention as always. Some fences needed repair, trees needed pruning, and the animals required extra care. The young woman moved confidently, carrying water, gathering firewood, and tending the animals. She noticed small changes in the man, too. He laughed more freely and offered guidance without the sharpness of earlier days. His patience seemed endless, and she found herself trusting his presence completely. One afternoon, as they worked together, repairing a section of fence, a sudden windstorm swept across the fields. The air was cold and sharp, and debris tumbled across the land. The young woman froze for a moment, but the man was immediately at her side. Guiding her to safety, they huddled under the shelter of a tree, waiting for the wind to die down. The moment passed, but the closeness remained. Their hands brushed and neither pulled away. She felt warmth in her chest and a deep sense of care for Bin. The following days they focused on preparing the land for winter. The young woman learned how to preserve food for the months ahead and how to mend clothing and blankets. She worked carefully with his guidance and felt a growing confidence in her abilities. The man watched her closely, noting her improvements and offering quiet praise. Her heart swelled with pride and belonging. Evenings became times for reflection and planning. They would sit near the fire, speaking softly of dreams and hopes. She spoke of planting more crops and expanding their small cabin. He listened carefully and occasionally shared his own thoughts and memories. They discovered a deep bond, not only in work, but in understanding and supporting each other. They felt a connection that grew stronger with each passing day. One cold morning, she woke to find him already tending the animals. She joined him silently, moving through the tasks with ease and confidence. They worked together seamlessly, their movements coordinated through months of shared labor. She noticed small gestures like the way he handed her tools without words, and the way he adjusted the fire to keep her warm. These small acts spoke more than words ever could. As the frost deepened, she took time to gather herbs from the small garden for winter teas and remedies. The man helped her carry the baskets back to the cabin. They laughed softly over the struggle and felt satisfaction in the shared effort. Each day was full of small victories and quiet joys that strengthened their partnership and deepened their emotional bond. Evening, after a long day of work, they sat outside watching the stars appear in the clear winter sky. She rested her head lightly on his shoulder and felt the warmth of his presence. Her heart was full of gratitude and love. She realized that the journey from fear and uncertainty to trust and connection had transformed her completely. She had discovered strength, resilience, and the capacity for deep emotional attachment. The man felt a sense of completeness he had never known. He had lived years in solitude, cautious of others and slow to trust. Yet her presence had softened him. Her laughter, her diligence, and her compassion had become an essential part of his life. He felt joy in shared moments and a deep satisfaction in their partnership. They were no longer two people merely surviving. They were a family in every sense of the word. Days passed and the frost became heavier, covering the fields and trees. They worked tirelessly to ensure the animals were fed and the cabin was warm and secure. The young woman had grown capable and confident. She moved through each task with purpose and grace and found joy in the small accomplishments of daily life. The man observed her quietly, noticing the strength and determination she had developed. One afternoon, while collecting firewood, she slipped on ice, but he was immediately at her side, steadying her. His hands were strong and gentle, and his gaze was full of concern. She realized again how deeply she cared for him and how much she depended on his presence. They shared a quiet moment, standing together in the icy air, feeling the connection that had grown over time inside the cabin. They prepared meals together. Their conversation was light and filled with shared memories and gentle laughter. They spoke of the coming winter and made plans to ensure comfort and warmth. Each word and gesture reflected the depth of understanding and trust they had built. The cabin was no longer a place of survival. It was a home filled with love and partnerships. The first heavy snow fell. They sat together by the fire, watching the flakes drift to the ground. The young woman felt a sense of peace. She had never known the journey from being sold into uncertainty to finding trust and love had taught her resilience, patience, and the value of companionship. She understood that love could grow slowly through shared effort, care, and understanding. Man felt similarly. He had learned that connection and trust could transform life, even in harsh conditions. Her presence had brought warmth, laughter, and hope to his days. He realized that he had come to love her fully and that their bond was unshakable. They had built a life together that was strong and enduring. Through the long winter, they continued to work and care for each other. The young woman learned to anticipate his needs, and he learned to value her insight and strength. They faced challenges together with patience and determination. Their love deepened in the quiet moments of shared labor and mutual support. They discovered that true connection was built in everyday acts of care and consideration. One evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the moonlight reflect off the snow. She rested her hand lightly on his and felt the steady warmth of his hand. In return, the wind was cold, but the warmth between them was unshakable. She felt gratitude for the life they had built and hope for the future that lay ahead. The man looked at her with a quiet smile. He realized that she had become essential to his life. Her presence had brought him joy, peace, and fulfillment. He felt a deep desire to protect and care for her and knew that their bond would sustain them through whatever challenges might come. Their hearts were intertwined, and their trust and affection unbreakable. The young woman and the man continued to face the harsh winter together. They moved through each day with purpose and strength. Their love was evident in the smallest gestures and shared tasks, and in the quiet moments of reflection. They had learned that trust and care were the foundation of lasting love, and that hearts could grow open even in the hardest circumstances. As the winter deepened, they sat together by the fire, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this place. They remembered the fear, uncertainty, and loneliness of the past, and marveled at the trust and love that had grown. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, yet they also knew that together they could face anything. Their hearts were full, and their spirits resilient. The first days of the new year arrived with bitter cold. The young woman woke to a sky pale and heavy with frost. She moved carefully around the cabin, ensuring the fire remained strong and the animals were safe. The man had already begun chopping wood and stacking it near the door for easy access. They worked side by side without words, their movements as seamless and familiar as they prepared for the harsh weeks ahead. Each morning the sun rose slowly across the fields. Their small garden lay covered in frost and snow, but they still tended it. Carefully ensuring the roots and small plants were protected, she learned to cover the seedlings with straw and old cloth to keep them warm. The man watched her carefully, guiding her hands and offering quiet advice. She noticed the gentleness in his voice and the patience in his eyes, and felt warmth spread through her chest inside. The cabin each day followed a steady rhythm. She prepared meals while he repaired tools and checked the fences. They moved with purpose, sharing tasks. Naturally, each small gesture carried meaning and care. Her heart had grown full with the trust and love that had developed over months. They communicated in ways without words, through gestures and glances that spoke volumes. 1 morning, a heavy snowfall blocked the main path to town. They could not travel to get supplies and had to rely on what they had on hand. She began to feel concern for their provisions, but the man remained calm. He reminded her of the preserved foods and what they could do to stretch it. He guided her in preparing meals, carefully conserving ingredients. She learned to mix grains and dried herbs to make soups that nourished and warmed them. Both discovered creativity and resilience in these quiet moments. The days became long and silent, except for the occasional creak of the roof under snow and the wind outside. Yet each day they found small moments of joy. They would sit together by the fire, sharing stories and laughter over memories or small mishaps in the cabin. They spoke of the past and what life had been before they met. Their voices were soft and their eyes gentle, showing the growing depth of trust and affection. Between them one day, while repairing a broken section of the fence, a young animal wandered dangerously close to the edge of the property. The woman froze in fear, but the man moved quickly and guided her safely. He secured the animal and then turned to her with a small, reassuring smile. She realized her heart had grown to care deeply, not only for him, but for all they shared, and she felt a sense of protection and partnership. She had never known before the long hours indoors during storms allowed them to work on small projects. She learned to sew new clothes and mend old ones. The man helped her build simple furniture and shelves for the cabin, their laughter and gentle teasing filled the room and reminded them that life could carry joy even during hardships. They discovered new strengths in themselves and in each other. Each evening the fire became a place for quiet reflection. They would sit side by side watching the flames dance and feel the warmth of the room. The young woman would lean lightly against him, and he would place his hand gently over hers. They did not speak much, yet the presence of each other was enough. Their hearts had grown together, and a steady rhythm of trust, care, and quiet love's winter deepened. They began to make small improvements to the cabin. Adding insulation and repairing cracks in the walls, they moved with careful determination, ensuring everything was safe and warm. She learned to use new tools and to handle heavier tasks with guidance. The man admired her growth and determination, noting how far she had come from the uncertain girl who had first arrived. They also began to talk about the future more openly. Their conversations were careful and thoughtful. She spoke of planting more crops and perhaps raising more animals when spring came. She spoke of expanding the cabin and creating more comfort for their life together. They shared visions and dreams. Discovering that their desires aligned and that they wanted a shared life built on trust, care, and love, one clear night, they stepped outside to look at the stars. The sky was sharp and clear, and the snow reflected the light of the moon. She rested, her hand on his arm, feeling the steady warmth beneath. He stood close, giving her a sense of safety and belonging. She realized that she had never felt such calm and contentment before, and that she had come to rely on him in every way, not only for protection but for emotional support. The long winter allowed them to deepen their routines. She learned to predict the weather by watching the clouds and wind. She noticed changes in the man and would offer a quiet word or gentle action to ease tension. He learned to anticipate her needs and to provide support without intrusive words. Their bond grew stronger and more subtle with each passing day. They discovered that love could be built quietly and steadily through small gestures of care and understanding. During the occasional breaks in the storm, they would venture outside to check on the animals or repair fences. The cold bit at their hands and faces, yet they found satisfaction in completing tasks together. She began to feel a sense of pride and accomplishment, not only in her work, but in the shared life they were building. The man noticed her growth and praised her quietly, recognizing her resilience. Encouraged through these months, she learned not only to survive, but to thrive. She discovered patience and diligence and the joy of shared effort. She understood the value of trust and the quiet power of love built over time. The man had taught her that partnership meant more than protection. It meant understanding, patience, and shared responsibility for all that was important to them. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat by the fire together. She spoke of memories from her childhood and what she had hoped for in life. He listened attentively and shared stories from his past. They laughed softly together and sometimes grew quiet, sharing the comfort of mutual understanding. Their connection deepened in ways neither could have predicted. When she first arrived at the cabin, the first signs of spring appeared gradually. A small patch of earth thawed, revealing the first shoots of green. The young woman felt excitement and anticipation. She prepared the soil and gathered seeds for planting. The man guided her carefully, offering suggestions and observing her work. They spoke of the growing season and the life that would return to the land. Their hearts felt connected to the earth and to each other in a new way. Worked side by side, planting seeds and preparing the garden. The soil was cold and wet, but they moved with determination. Their hands often touched as they passed tools or lifted baskets of soil and plants. Each touch was a quiet reminder of the bond that had grown between them. She felt a deep sense of belonging and trust, and knew that the man shared this feeling too. In the evenings they continued their quiet reflection by the fire. She would lean against him, and he would place his hand gently over hers. They spoke softly about the future and the life they wished to build together. They discovered that they shared hopes for children, a home, and a life filled with mutual care and understanding. Their bond was no longer just about survival, but about love and companionship. Challenges continued to arise. They faced unexpected storms and difficult work, but they moved through each together, relying on the trust and connection they had built. They discovered that they could support each other emotionally and physically, and that together they could face any hardship. The young woman felt a deep sense of pride and accomplishment in the life they were creating.